Welcome to the Redeemer University podcast. I'm your host, Zach, and today we are going to be talking with core and English professor Doug Sikkema. Join us as we nerd out over the core program. We talk about the benefits and purpose of the core in Redeemer University's context. If it is your first time here with us, make sure you like and subscribe. Find us on your podcast platform of choice. Check out some of our other episodes that explore various aspects of Redeemer, Christian education, and so much more. Thank you for making us part of your day. And with that, here we go.
The world is constantly changing, and sometimes I feel like I'm not really equipped to adapt to this changing world.
Before coming to Redeemer, I didn't really see a way for sciences to interact with faith. These are just two things that seem to be completely opposite.
So I chose Redeemer very deliberately for a core curriculum experience. I wanted the opportunity to be able to read and think about topics from a variety of perspectives.
Core has helped prepare me because it's taught me how to think about the world.
One of the things that the core does is it teaches us to put question marks where we usually put periods.
So the core program at Redeemer gives students the groundwork to build their discipline and their vocation.
Anything that teaches you critical thinking, which the core program does, is preparing you for the future. And in that way, it's slowly building this foundation.
I would say the core has given me an opportunity to make my faith relevant in the public space.
So I came to Redeemer not only to study, but also to discover my calling. And I feel like the core curriculum really helped me launch that.
Now, looking back, I deeply appreciate the core curriculum and the well-rounded education I got because of it.
My Redeemer education has greatly helped prepare me for my future. I feel like I am more prepared for a career and making an impact than I have ever been or ever thought I could be.
The core program really just showed me how my faith can interact with my field of study and how I could use that in a more practical way in the world that we live in.
One of the things that we do at Redeemer in the core program is also look at where the world needs you. And Redeemer wants to equip you to not only develop yourself, but to see that the world actually is awaiting you.
The only, the amazing professor of core and English, Professor Doug Sikkema. Welcome to the Redeemer podcast. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Zach. I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's good to be here.
It's awesome. And so for those of you who are just tuning in, today we are rocking the core, which means we're talking about the core program here at Redeemer. And let's maybe just start with that. So, Professor Sikkema, if someone has no idea what the core at Redeemer is, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so the core program is one of the most distinctive pieces of a Redeemer education. And I think about it like if you think you're working out your core. Your core is kind of the muscle group, kind of right. Yeah, exactly. Your abs. And it's what allows you to do kind of everything else. So that's a little bit metaphorical. If you don't know what the core is, it's the courses you have to take when you're at Redeemer, but they provide the sort of foundation from which you'll do your major. So if you're getting into kinesiology, you're getting into history, you're getting into poli-sci, whatever your field's going to be, there's going to be this shared grounding of knowledge that all students will get during their 4 years. Most of the core course will happen in your first year. You'll get 3 more in your second year, and then there's a sort of capstone you get at the end of it. And these are, again, very foundational questions that kind of, I like to frame it, I'm an English guy, they kind of tell us stories. So the first year core, like the Hum 110 and Hum 120 sequence, is kind of putting you into the story of the West, of Western culture. So we start with the Greeks, we go all the way to the present time. Some people say it's kind of from Plato to NATO. The other story is we're also Christians. So what's the story of the Bible? Where do I fit in the unfolding drama? That is the Christian story from God's creative utterance to let there be light, all the way to his prophetic revelation of a coming judgment. And then there is also the sort of CTS 110, which is your introduction to the Reformed worldview. So how do I take this story and apply it to my current moment and see that the Christian tradition has amazing resources, not just for what we believe, but for what we believe and how we actually kind of enact that right in in our discipline, in our calling, in our life beyond Redeemer.
Absolutely. And well said. Another way that I kind of phrase it when I'm explaining it to prospective students is that if your degree is a tree, the core program is the trunk of that tree.
Yeah.
Where and the other courses you take of your major and your minor area of study, they're kind of branches that kind of come off. But because you have that foundational core, understanding, it lays that foundation to take, okay, I'm honing my Christian perspective in the drama of Scripture or in the the humanities courses that I take, or a faith and philosophy course or a science core course. And I can apply that to my, major area of study or my minor area of study, right, to help me, continue to develop my own, Christian worldview as I engage with culture, engage with the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also try to tell first year students, because a lot of them, some of them know a little bit more about what the core is. And some of them expect to have nothing but kind of free choice about what your credits are going to be. And one of the things about core is that it's chosen for you, which I also hope they enjoy that, right? Like that it kind of takes the pressure off if you trust the people who are making the choices, that these are things that are worth your attention. They're worth thinking about. And knowing myself, someone who went through Redeemer and had a different version of the core, I actually really appreciated being kind of pushed out of my comfort zone. I don't think as an 18-year-old I would have known how helpful it was to get university level science, a philosophy class under my belt, to have some world history. All those things actually were like so formative in shaping where I ended up. But when I was 18, I wouldn't have necessarily known that. It was really helpful for that piece of the kind of architecture of my education to have been kind of designed for me.
Definitely. Yeah. And just even the concept of getting out of your comfort zone and learning to, do a different discipline of study at a university level is so beneficial in all aspects of your life. At Redeemer, we often talk about educating the whole student, and that you'll have a well-rounded education that actually makes you, more employable after you graduate. Just if you're involved with your church, you offer, different skill sets, different knowledge, and opportunities that come that way. And that's definitely one of the things that I appreciate about the core, for sure. Mm-hmm. So let's maybe dive into at the core level here. Pardon the pun. Anyway, at the core, what is the core? No. Where would you say that you see students benefit the most out of the core program?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Where do they benefit the most? And that's going to be very contingent on every student you talk to.
For sure.
One of my favorite things now that I've been doing this for a little while is when I have alumni come and visit me, or even students who are in their third and fourth year, who say, I still think about passages we read in Dante. I still think about some of the ideas we discussed around Augustine. So that's the Hum 110 course, which is kind of like a great texts course where we do a little bit of sort of history, where we're just reading primary sources. And it's really amazing to me how much of our education system is designed not to have students actually encounter the kind of beauty, the wisdom, the wonder that are these old voices and these old texts. So that they get that first introduction in the first year to spark their imagination. And I think to me, the success of that is they realize they can do it. They realize, and this is what C.S. Lewis says, is that these old voices are actually easier to understand than academics. Usually, they're more delightful and they're more challenging, but we're usually kind of intimidated when we're like 17, 18, 19 in encountering them. So I think in terms of like academic success, I love that moment a student realizes they can actually go and read Sophocles on their own. They can do that. And that these old ideas about what is justice, what is beauty, what is goodness, what is truth are very, very old questions. So I love hearing those stories of students who have started to immerse themselves in like old literature in terms of like not practically, but a course that helps students launch them on their vocation, I do think CTS is still really significant for students when they think about their discipline as a Christian. And every student comes in with different kind of expectations, but a lot of them, it's still like the modern kind of narrative that our religion is kind of what we do on Sunday. It's like it's a set of these practices, but you realize like your Christian calling is fundamentally manifested in the work you do in your neighborhood, in your community, in your vocation, and it's a form of worship. I love seeing that light go on for them to be like my social work, my reading of historical texts. All of this stuff is actually the way I worship God and serve my community by doing this work well. So I love when the light goes on for students, and for some of them that they had never thought of it that way before. But I feel like that's the kind of depth charge that will have long lasting impacts. And when they're 30, when they're 40, when they're 50, they'll keep hopefully thinking about their vocation, their calling as something that's definitely shaped and guided by their faith.
Absolutely. And you're going to have to pardon me. I'm going to have a little selfish moment here where one of my favorite moments, it was, so I started at Redeemer in 2016, and I took the Humanities 110 course with Dr. Jonathan Jolfs. And one of my favorite stories, this is a deep cut here, was a French story called Biscleve.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's not a very long story or anything like that, but I wrote a paper and a video essay on Biscleve because I just found it this fascinating story. It's a werewolf story. I think some people might accredit it to being the first werewolf story that, in our modern times at least. Yeah. And just I love that it challenged me to go read a story that I would never take the time to read. I would never look up a French werewolf story or something like that, right? And it's something that's impacted me as a storyteller. It's impacted me as a writer. And, that's the type of, benefit that I got from taking, those humanity courses or the drama of scripture, which is pretty much a 4-month speed read through the entire Bible, dividing it into 6-act story structure. And, I could nerd out on the core all day.
No. And that to me is like, again, I love hearing stories like that, Zach. And it's funny. I was just telling my kids the story of Biscleve, right? We kind of do story time at night, and I was telling them about werewolves. So I gave them a kind of tamer version of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, of a wolf that's actually the good guy that bites off the nose of a woman, and then she has like children with no noses. All this stuff it's so bizarre.
It's so bizarre.
But then, I think to help our students see, like, humans in other times and other places are familiar enough that they're asking questions they're asking, and they're also strange. There's things about the Middle Ages that are just not like contemporary times, and kind of sit in that strangeness is also really good for us. So
absolutely. It's all right. So we'll get back to talking about the core, but we had to talk about Biscleve a little bit. So what are, I guess, let me, kind of rope it back to, what are some of the things that, you're seeing in students, because you're teaching the core classes right now, right?
Yeah, I teach Hum 110, Hum 210, CTS 110, and Hum 120.
Awesome. And what would you say is some of the response of students in some of these core classes?
It's a good time to ask that question, Zach. We just went through a entire course sort of self-study. We did survey results of the last 6 or 7 years. So there's lots of things I could say about this. Are you talking about my specific year right now, or just generally?
We go in general, either or. Yeah.
Yeah, so the core is met with, I think, some expected resistance because I think we do live in a culture where we champion our choice, our freedom of choice, and coming to a university, especially where it's like you're at this stage of life where you're becoming autonomous or more autonomous, more independent, and you're trying to focus. And I think especially in an age where we're seeing some financial precariousness, you want to know that what you're doing has a kind of use value, if you know what I mean, right? Because it's an investment to come here. It's an investment, especially at some of the prime earning years of your life, to be spending money, being trained up. And again, as fun as stories about werewolves are, you could very easily see why people are like, well, that's kind of a useless waste of my time. I'd rather be learning the kind of fine arts of accounting so I can get out and get in the real world. And right. So I think that attitude is something that's probably as old as university life, but we see it here, and we see it in the core, especially, that the core can have some resistance to just how pragmatic it actually is. Another challenge in the core is also just, and I think it's a relatively recent, COVID kind of catalyzed it, is the ability to read at length with sustained attention. Difficult things. And I know the nature of education is starting to shift with a lot more like audio visual. I mean, hence we're doing a video podcast here. Great. And also AI and things like that. So the way that students, and not just students, actually, even myself, if I look at my own kind of research and habits of learning, it's largely starting to shift towards different forms of learning where reading is actually increasingly a challenge. So especially in the core course like Hum 110, Hum 120, philosophy, we're asking to do a lot of difficult reading. And hey, we see that as a current challenge. But we're working on like just helping students build up the habits
for sure.
So like, right, so it's like any muscle, it needs to be exercised. And, still part of the learned life will require you to read slowly and do the hard thing of reading those texts. So.
And there's something to be said about the shared experience of going through the core program. And I know university itself, in Redeemer's context, is a shared experience. You're building a relationship. It's a small campus. You get to know people. I like to say it's a head nod, hey community, where you're walking down the hall saying, hey, what's up? But in the core program's interesting because all of the core classes, you're with other students from different disciplines of studies.
Yeah.
So, I remember doing a group project with, some psychology majors or some science majors, and I was a media student. And so getting, kind of the different perspectives, it helps you make a more informed decision. And I think that's best encapsulated in the final core course of the 10 courses in CTS 410. And not that we're going to go through each individual courses in this episode of the podcast, but could you maybe talk specifically about that capstone fourth year core course?
Yeah, so the capstone, I'm glad you mentioned that because the capstone is another one of these courses that for students, especially in their fourth year, that can be seen as a challenge to take time away from your studies or away from your work to do this other project. And one of the things that we're working on just as faculty is how do we kind of help sort of shape the narrative around that this is not a distraction from your studies. It's literally what we're called to do. And this is kind of what we were talking about before, right? Your work as a manifestation of not just your skills, but your calling. So yeah, the capstone, like the fourth year core course, you get to work with a group and actually solve a real world problem using all the different tools you have at your disposal with a group of colleagues that are maybe in English, maybe in media, maybe in history, maybe in science. And it's the closest thing to mimicking what the real world outside of these walls will be like. And I know students can kind of chafe against it, but in my own experience, like I've had a lot of different roles in magazine publishing and a think tank, and to me, nothing is closer to like a real life kind of experience than seeing a bunch of different people come together, pull together for a common goal, and then accomplish a made thing that they see at the end of it. And I don't know, when I hear the stories from Dr. Karen Dielman and some of the other profs who are working in it, it's remarkable to me what students here are actually contributing to not just Hamilton, but all kinds of other communities. So doing very real good work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give the example is when I did the CTS 410, I had someone who was a psych major, someone a kinesiology major, a business major, a social work major, and then I myself was a media major. And our task was to design a walking school bus program for 2 elementary schools in Hamilton. And there were so many different factors into it. What seems like, oh, that's cool, that's edgy, that's that's going to be a fun project. We quickly found out, like, oh, you have to consider like kids limitations. You have to consider, adult supervision. You have to consider some sort of marketing campaign to get people on board with this and actually like commit to it. You have to work with the schools to talk about, what are some of the issues from their end. And that experience alone prepared me in my professional life here at Redeemer to collaborate with people. When I'm involved with my church, if you're on like a committee, or if you're on a parent school board, or you're in some sort of town hall office in government, or even just a subcommittee in a business of any kind, there's so many opportunities where you have to work with people from all different walks of life. And a course like that gives you a fantastic, environment to learn and become excellent at working in those groups.
It's funny, just to bring it full circle. Like yesterday in my Hum 110 class, we were talking about the Greeks and the city-state, and just the kind of culture of not just like innovation and inquiry, but also a kind of culture that championed knowing how to work with other people, knowing how to persuade other people. And I, again, just the 410 experience is not just about you have an idea. How do you realize it? Like to your point, you have to actually work with other people. That itself is challenging, right? Because people have different motivations. They have different gifts, different kind of like working talents. So all of that stuff that you're doing in the process of making this thing is actually part of the education. And again, the adult world, or the world outside of university, is filled with all those kind of things, right? Experiences where you have to make things with other people. And like you're saying, think through economics, think through the policy, because it's really easy to kind of chirp or critique things and be like, why don't people do this? And then when you actually get in the game and try to do it, you realize there's so many factors that make things work or not work. So for students to get a little taste of that, I think is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think of kind of the practical components of the core of, exposing yourself to subjects that you normally wouldn't study, getting to, as we mentioned, get to work with students from other disciplines of study. But I think also just the practical component of bringing your university degree back to a Christian worldview, that's something that sets Redeemer apart from a secular institution, right?
I would hope so.
Yeah,
you're right. Yeah. No, I absolutely. And I sometimes feel like we can get so used to it here. I mean, I've been kind of in this world for a long time that you forget there's a kind of beautiful freedom where we can actually talk about these ideas, not just as solving like real world problems or having solutions to, but as actually a way of living coram Deo, right? A living before the face of God. And I do love that all the way from like the Hum 110 courses, we look at the early Greeks and the Romans to the projects that we make, we're framing it, right, in a way that our faith and the large story of creation to new creation is giving this a kind of deep purpose that is actually more than just my own kind of self-fulfillment. It's actually about my service to the kingdom, right? And how God's work is being manifested, and I'm being invited and called into it, right? That again, I think it's a much richer way of viewing the work we're doing than just simply doing it for our own glory or our own kind of status.
Absolutely. And I know we're starting to run out of time here, but I wanted to just kind of, what would you say if you had a prospective student, they're in high school right now, they come visit Redeemer and they're talking to you and asking, like, what is the core program? What would you say kind of in that one-on-one conversation to that student?
I would talk about just exactly what is education, right? What do we want when we want education? And there's lots of different answers to that, right? Some people want the skills to do their job. Good. And I think you should. And I think Redeemer is a place where you will get that. Some people want to be sort of immersed in kind of the discourse, the kind of current conversations around whether it's philosophy, English literature. Great. But one of my favorite definitions comes from G.K. Chesterton. And he says, education is like nothing less than the soul of a society being passed from one generation to the next. And when I think about what Redeemer is offering and what the core program is specifically designed to do, it is kind of the torch bearing capacity of one generation passing it on to the next. And if we lose a sense of a kind of shared set of text, a shared narrative, a shared set of beliefs, all of which can be discussed and challenged and argued about, like that's what a university should be about. But if we lose that sense that there's actually a certain set of ideas and a way of thinking that's significant and needs to be passed on, then we've kind of lost what Redeemer's distinctive mission and vision is. So the core is the place where they're gonna be the torchbearer. And I look back, and I had Al Walters teach me. I had Craig Bartholomew teach me, Dr. Deborah Bowen, Ben Faber, and a lot of them, again, kind of imparted this to me. And it's amazing now, 20 years on from that, right?
Full circle.
Yeah. It's kind of been passed along. And I think for any student who gets kind of excited about higher education, I think the deepest vision of what higher education is the kind of passing of a soul of a community society to the next. And yeah, I hope that an 18-year-old gets kind of ignited by that. They want to be part of that.
Absolutely. One final question here I like to ask people is, so I know you yourself, you're a professor at Redeemer right now. You're an alumni of Redeemer. What is one of, or if not the most, your favorite part of the Redeemer University experience?
So my favorite part of the Redeemer experience as a student was 100% when I was a student here, it was the living on campus, and having a group of people that I could not only just learn with, but also like share life with. And I know it sounds like almost like cliche and whatever, but a lot of the people from Redeemer, we've built a school together outside of this. We've shared our lives together. We go to church together. We've raised our kids together. So Redeemer was the place where I built a lot of the relationships that were not just professional. They were also social, and that's meant a lot to me. Yeah, absolutely.
No, thanks for sharing. That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, Doug, thank you so much for coming on the Redeemer podcast. Look forward to maybe having you on again in the future. And anyone who's watching, if you're interested in learning more about the core, or you'd like to meet, Professor Sikkema, make sure you email admissions@redeemer.ca. We'll try and set up a meeting or have you come for a visit, and we'll make that happen. So thanks so much, Doug, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Good to be here.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Redeemer University podcast. Thank you again to Professor Doug Sikkema for coming on and giving some insight into Redeemer's core program. If you would like more information on Redeemer, please check out our website, redeemer.ca, and you can always connect with us by email at admissions@redeemer.ca if you're interested in applying. God bless, and we'll see you in the next episode.